This is episode 18 of Baba Yaga's Magic, the magic of Green Week. When most English speakers think of a green holiday, St. Patrick's Day comes to mind, right? But for Slavic people, Zelenyy Tyzhdeñ or Green Week is a special holiday celebrating the end of spring and the beginning of summer. During this special week, we honor our ancestors, celebrate sacred trees and plants, hang out with the rusalky, and perform special rituals designed to ensure a good harvest. Join me in this episode where I will teach you all about the mystery and magic of this very special ancient holiday. Before we dive in, though, I want to share a really special way that you can make magic with me, Madame Pamita, twice a month. You might have heard about our amazing full moon spell kits, which are magical spell kits and workshops where we work together and we work on creating tools of magic that we empower and we learn how to use them. Or my new moon candle spell workshops that we hold once a month. We create these workshops once, they're only available once and then never again. And we create them just for you. And each is only available for 1 week out of forever. And then it goes away forever. But did you know that you can subscribe to these? We have subscription services. So if you've ever wanted to participate in the new moon or full moon spells, but miss that window of opportunity to get one, I know how disappointing that can be. But the solution is you can subscribe to the full moon spell kit and workshop and the new moon candle spell kits, the candle spell kit and workshop or candle spell services, and get a guaranteed spot at the head of the line to be the very first to get yours sent to you. Whenever you sign up for a new moon or full moon subscription, you'll get charged once every lunation, once every 28 days, and then you'll be the first to get it when it goes live. Each month, you'll be charged every 28 days, and then you'll be subscribed as long as you're subscribed, and you'll only be charged for the next spell kit or service. Not only that, but if you subscribe, you'll get the spell at a discount. There's no minimum number of months to stay subscribed. You can unsubscribe at any time, and it really could not be easier. If you'd like to sign up now and get in on that next special spell and that workshop with me, go to fullmoonspell.com or newmoonspells.com and you can sign up today. All right, let's talk about Green Week. Since pagan times, every year in the late spring and early summer, Ukrainian, Belarusian, Polish, Czech, Slovakian, and other Slavic peoples have a special celebration called Green Week. The green holidays originated in pagan times and were based on the solar cycle, marking the end of spring and the beginning of summer. Green Week is a holiday that's filled with ritual and fun, and like many Slavic holidays, includes honoring and celebrating with our ancestors. But there's so many other magical things about Green Week. There's dancing, there's singing and dancing in the forest, there's weaving of wreaths and decorating the houses with green branches and herbs, and holding ceremonies for a good harvest. Like Celtic Druids, ancient Slavic people worshipped in oak groves and revered nature and trees in particular. They also held the belief that the ancestors could influence the success of the year's crops. So when we look at Slavic holidays throughout the year, we often see honoring the plant kingdom and honoring our ancestors being very intertwined. Like many ancient Slavic pagan holidays, the green holidays, duration of the green holidays varies among different countries and even different regions, and they may have variations on the rituals, how many days it's celebrated, what days it's celebrated, and so on. So I'm going to give you some general practices, and I'm going to share some specific practices as well. But just know that when you look at your own Slavic tradition, or if you look at Slavic traditions, you might see some differences based on where the Green Week is celebrated. So after the spread of Christianity, so Green Week is always a pagan holiday, but after the spread of Christianity, the green holidays became tied to a holiday which takes place 50 days after Easter. Now, for Ukrainians, it's called Trinity. For English speakers, it's called Pentecost. And nowadays, Green Sunday, which is Trinity or Pentecost, is considered the main celebration of Green Week. Pentecost, by the way, is also Shavuot, which is originally a Jewish holiday, which is celebrated the 50th day after Pesach or Passover. And originally it was in honor of that first harvest, or later the receiving of the Torah. For us this year in 2023, this holiday falls on June 4th. So Green Sunday or Pentecost or Trinity falls on June 4th in 2023. But every year, it's going to be different based on when Easter is or when Passover is, and that will tell us when the holiday is. Now, we find lots of regional variations on exactly when it's celebrated. Some people celebrate the entire week before Trinity, starting on the Monday, going all the way through the Sunday. So, for example, this year, some people would celebrate it from May 29th through June 4th, for example. Other people celebrate it the 3 days before Trinity and 3 days after. So that would be June 1st through 7th, for example. Now, while Trinity Day in Orthodox Christianity represents the Holy Trinity, a modern pagan interpretation of this holiday is the Trinity holidays commemorating the Trinity of creative power. And that would be fire, water, and greenery or nature and all those, the plant kingdom. The name Green Holidays is of pre-Christian origin and has a real wider meaning for the ancient Slavs. It wasn't just a week, it was a whole period of time. And in modern times, we would celebrate it for a day or a week, but in ancient times, it would be celebrated for much longer. There were many holidays celebrating this change of the seasons in pagan times, all taking place around the month of June. For example, June 4th was the day of Yarilo, a holiday of the god Yarilo, who's the sun god of young greenery. He's youth, he's sun energy, he's the young sun. And the fertile forces of earth are represented by the god Yarilo. So there would be a ceremony called the Seven that would take place. And the cult object for this ceremony was a young birch tree. June 9th was the holiday of giving birth to life in the sprigs of wheat, of the spring wheat that was sprouting up. June 11th through 20th would be the days when the field needs rain for the development of the wheat or the grain. And then they would want during the flowering of that grain there to be dry weather. And we'll talk about this idea of their desiring rain and doing work for rain and then doing work for dryness so that those grains don't get damp and moldy. June 19th through 24th was Rusalky week, or the week of the mermaids, or the goddesses of the water. And then June 24th, or around summer solstice, would be Kupala. Kupala Day is the holiday of the sun. It's a fire and water holiday that we're going to be talking about actually in the next episode. Now, information about the ancient ritual of the green holidays has actually been preserved in medieval documents. And a lot of our information about Slavic pagan traditions was written down because it was an oral tradition. It was only written down by Christians who were trying to stamp out these pagan practices. And so they are describing them, but that's how we know that they existed. So at the end of the 11th century, for example, Czech Prince Vladislav condemned the rites performed on Tuesday or Wednesday during the green holidays when a sacrificial animal was slaughtered near the springs as an offering for the spirits of the water, and salt and poppy seeds were scattered also as an offering. In the statutes of the Gniezno province and in Poland and the Krakow and Poznan diocese in the first half of the 15th century, a priest described the appeals of the clergy on the green holidays to honor the Christian God instead of attracting the attention of the pagan gods with songs, clapping, and dancing. So these sources actually list the name of the sacred characters, Lado, Ileli, Yasi, Nia, as well as variants of these names. And a sermon that was written around 1450 states that Polish people honored the deities Alado, Gardina, and Jesse on the Green Feast. So, according to some interpretations, these are actually not the names of gods, but were words that were in a song. So, there's debate still about whether these were gods and goddesses or these were words of a song that was sung, a pagan song that was sung during that time. Excuse me. Sometimes Green Week overlaps or is combined with another special holiday, which is Zelenyy Tyzhdeñ, or Rusalky Week, or Mermaid Week. We talked about the rusalky in an earlier episode, and this is that special holiday that's celebrated in spring. In some areas, cornflowers were considered to be rusalky flowers, and so they could not be plucked during Rusalky Week because they were their special flowers. After Trinity, a week later, on Monday, in some places, there were rusalky, which were feasts and dances, and the purpose of such celebrations were to escort the rusalky from the land back to the water, from out of the world of the living, where they were bringing fertility to the fields and bringing them back to their watery home in the rivers and ponds and lakes. It was believed that the rusalky would leave their rivers and ponds to bring rain and fertility to the fields. But on Rusalky Week, it was time to go to the forest and go to the riversides to invite the rusalky to come back to the water so that rain would no longer fall on the crops, that rain would be light. It wouldn't be creating a rain that would destroy the crops. And this was a way to do that, to invite the rusalky to come back to their watery home, to no longer be watering the land. There were lots of songs. There were rusalky songs. In particular, there's a song that translates to, I will send the rusalky off, or I will send the mermaids off. And this was a song that was sung to bring the rusalky home to their watery home, the lakes or the rivers. During Rusalky Week, it was prohibited to go into the fields because the rusalky were there in the fields. I mean, you were supposed to call them back. And if you went and met them in the fields, they might tickle you to death, or they would ask you riddles or trick you in some way. These were trickster spirits. Now, the pagan rituals of the green holidays are often associated with the rusalky. So in Policia, rusalky are seen as the souls of ancestors. And so a dinner would be arranged before Trinity to create an offering for the rusalky. Since the rusalky were considered to be souls of all of the dead, they didn't go to the cemetery on Rusalky Week because the souls wouldn't be there at that time. The souls were out wandering the world or visiting relatives. So you'd have a dinner in your home for your beloved ancestors who had passed on. According to common belief in other regions, girls who were born or died on Trinity or during Rusalky Week in particular would become rusalky. And sometimes it was believed that if your spirit was going to turn into a rusalka, it meant that you were both born and died during Rusalky Week. And some were even more detailed about it. You had to be born, married, and die during Rusalky Week. And then when you died, you would turn into a rusalka. Romanians, Moldovans, and Ukrainians know there are lots of prohibitions working during Zelenyy Tyzhdeñ, during Rusalky Week. The reason you would do that is you wouldn't want to do any weaving, spinning, because again, we talked about this in the episode about the rusalky. They were master spinners, master weavers, so you wouldn't do any work with cloth during that Mermaid Week. Now, as far as Green Week goes, there are folklore rites associated with all of the growing plants on the green holidays, and many of these rites are still celebrated today. Houses or people, typically during Green Week, houses or people were decorated with wreaths and trees themselves could also be decorated. There's a great tradition during Green Week of one young woman in the village being dressed like a big bush, like she's covered with vegetation, and a group of young women go from door to door, caroling from door to door during Green Week, and sing these special songs. They either sing the mermaid songs or they sing the songs associated with Green Week. And then caroling or trick-or-treating, a gift is given and water is dumped on the young woman that's dressed as a bush as a sign of fertility and as a way of creating that fertility for the land. It's a symbolic gesture to bring that fertility to the land. So houses and people would be decorated with wreaths, and trees would be decorated with wreaths, and there would be branches and leaves and herbs and all kinds of things. So houses were decorated with lots of fragrant greenery, calamus, lovage, mint, wormwood, thyme, and fresh birch sprouts. The little fresh birch branches were used. Different regions, of course, would have different plants depending on what was available. So, for example, in Kyiv, young people would bring in oak branches and they would throw them on top of cucumbers. Now, in some places, dried herbs were used, and if there weren't fresh herbs available, dried herbs were used, leaves and flowers, and they might be taken to the cemetery and used to decorate the house. You could scatter it on the floor of the house, scatter along the road to the cemetery, or decorate the graves with wreaths of these flowers. Now, there's something called Novsky Easter or Mavsky Easter, and it's celebrated on the Thursday of the 7th week after Easter, sometimes 3 days before Trinity Day. And this day is marked by that honoring of those who had died, what is called not a good death, an unnatural death. So someone who died not of old age, but because of natural disaster, famine, maybe they were murdered, executed, they were a suicide, or something that was considered they would call it an unnatural death. So up until the 17th century, there was a custom of burying people who had died not a good death. They would bury them on Novsky Easter in special buildings that were called poorhouses. And the wakes that they would celebrate on this day had a special feature. After visiting the poorhouse and giving a meal at the graves, they would then have games and fortune telling in the groves, going into the woods and doing that. Now, this has been incorporated into Green Week, going into the forest, having games, doing fortune telling, singing, dancing, and so on. But originally it was associated with this holiday, celebrating and helping the spirits of the dead who were had a difficult death of some kind. Now, the universal belief of pagan Slavic people was that the dead don't want their living relatives to be sad. So there was always like a celebration. And this is still carried on to this day. A lot of times, like in Provodi that we talked about before, where you're going to the cemetery, you're celebrating, you're having a picnic, you're hanging out with your ancestors. You're not mourning them, you're having a little party with them. So in this poorhouse that the people that in this older tradition were buried, they would line this house and this area with trees, which over time would become a new grove of trees, which was a very sacred and holy place. Now, by the middle of the 19th century, the sort of ritualistic aspect of taking care of the dead really started to wane, and just the entertainment and celebration of Green Week took over, and that is really what we see today, is much more of that going on. Now, among Ukrainians on that Sunday morning of Trinity or Pentecost or Green Sunday, couples would take food and drink and go to the cemetery and visit their deceased relatives and friends, just like Provodi. And at the place of the burial, on the burial mounds, on the graves, they would leave treats, they would leave food, they'd leave Easter eggs and kroshanki and pesanki, and they had drinks and breads and cakes and all kinds of things. And they might even bury that food in the graves to feed the dead, or leave them on top of the graves. And the people that were there would talk to the people who were buried. Now, there were also formal ways of talking to the dead, which were incantations or prayers that were like half singing. They would sing or speak these songs to connect with their ancestors. Of course, special respect was paid to those who were most recently passed, the ones who were closest to us, but all the relatives were celebrated. Then, after this picnic with your relatives, the second part of this Memorial Sunday ceremony would be having a party, dancing, singing, dressing in costume, mumming. You could wear masks, you could bring musical instruments, jump, dance, play, sing. And it would end with these reenacted battles that were struggles or fights or races. These are just like mock battles or skirmishes that would end this celebration. So they would have this big celebration that was kind of a wild party in the cemetery. Now, during the green holiday in some areas of Ukraine, there were customs associated with sacred trees. There was one rite that's called driving a poplar, and it's known in the Poltava region, Kyiv region, and Cherkasy region, and Kharkiv. So the girls would choose one amongst themselves, and they would dress her up as the poplar tree. They decorate her with necklaces, ribbons, flowers, put a scarf on her, and take her around the village with some songs. The boys would pick up the poplar, carry her in the arms, and the girls would try and take it from the boys. Now they could take an effigy or an actual person, either one, and they would do this ritual. In Policia, they had the rite of the Trinity bush, and this was that rite that I was describing before, where they would dress up the girl in leaves, and there would be a song associated with this rite. And the song translates to, "A poplar stood by the edge of a clean field. Stand still, little poplar, don't be blown away. Don't give in to the raging wind." So this is really a magical act to protect the crops, to protect the land around in the village. In Podlasie, Poland, on the green holidays, boys would drive an ox around the village. And this was a real ox, and they would make a special harness made out of alder wood, and they would put a little effigy on top. And the ox had to jump until the little effigy or the doll fell off. And this was the ritual during the green holidays. In Mazovia, Poland, they would have a bull, and they would cover it with old net, and then that net was decorated with flowers and branches, and a birch wreath would be hung on its horns, and it would be driven ahead of the herd. And they would have this very decorated ox, and they would drive the whole herd to bless the herd, but they would decorate this one ox. They might put an effigy of a knight made of alder bark on the bull and then throw it on the ground. And they called this ceremony the ox wedding. In Kuyavia, a bull would be covered with a hood and flowers on its horn, and there would be a solemn procession accompanied by shepherds and young women with flowers, musicians, and the whole village would come out for this parade with the bull. Now, in Slovakia, they didn't use an actual bull, but there's an ancient kind of bull called an auroch that is extinct now, but existed in Europe up until the Middle Ages. And in Slovakia, they have men dress up as an auroch, like how two guys will get together and dress like a horse. Well, they would dress like this ancient bull. So one would stand behind the other one, put his hands on his shoulders of the one in front, and the one in front would hold a stick in his hand, and they would have a head of an auroch with a movable jaw. So this would be like a tall mumming costume with a big head on top. Kind of a little bit like Mary Lwyd in Wales. So we see this commonality. Now, this auroch head would have a tongue with fabric or leather hanging out of its mouth, and they would make its eyes with bits of tin, and they would hang bells from its long horn. And then they would put burlap or other material over the men so that they were covered, and they would just see the head of the auroch. Now, this wonderful celebration also, as I mentioned earlier, involved making of wreaths. And one of the rites of Green Week is to create a wreath out of birch. It's called curling the birch. And so young men and women would go into the forest. Women would bring a picnic. They'd invite the young men to go into the forest, and they'd sing songs of spring and dances and play games and sit down together and have fun together. And then they would search for a young birch tree with thin, long branches. And from this branch on the tree, they would create a wreath, curling that branch to make a wreath. And then they would sing the song with the lyrics, I walk in the garden, I plant grapes. I planted and watered them. Oh, I watered them and pinched them. After pinching them, I withered the wreath. Twisting the wreath, I release it into the water. Whoever takes the wreath, he will take me. So the guys would help their girlfriends to make a wreath of the beech tree, from the birch tree. And they would take that, and then they would take the wreath and they would cut it off and they would float it on the water, and they would sing this song, oh, I will make wreaths, and for all the holidays, oh, for all the holidays, for all the holidays, for all the holidays, on the anniversary and on the anniversary. And they would take that wreath after breaking it off and bring it to running water, usually rivers or lakes, and the girls would put them in the water in the evening, usually on the Saturday before Green Sunday, and they would let them go into the water like Kupala, doing a divination ceremony. What the wreath does is used to tell the divination about the future. And so they would, the boyfriends would try and catch their girlfriend's wreath so that they would show that they were courting each other and doing that. Now, one of the things in all these celebrations, it's most important to know that when they would go into the forest, they would never go alone, because this was the time that the rusalky were wandering around. And so you didn't want to get caught by a rusalky or other mischievous spirits being alone. So you'd always go in a group if you were going to go to the forest or go to the river. You'd never go off by yourself. Now there's another beautiful ritual called the Rite of Liali, and this ceremony was recorded in Volin, and it was held on Sunday or Monday. The girls would bring milk and cheese with them, and they would get together, and they would choose a winner. One of the girls would choose a winner. And so this winner was decorated with a wreath of flowers and garlands, again, decorating this one representative girl with all this plant material. And at this time, the boys would make a throne for this. So this could be, again, a real girl, or it could be an effigy. And they would form a circle, and the inner circle of girls, the outer circle of boys, and they would dance around this liala. And humorous songs, wedding songs were sung, and then the lialya would call them back. They would run away, and the lialya would call them back and hand out treats, wreaths to the girls, branches to the boys, treats to eat, and so on. And those wreaths were kept for next year, and then that was the tradition of lialya. So in a minute, I'm going to tell you about some other special events that are held during Green Week, particularly Klecznania and Kumlinia. So before I do that, though, let me share with you how you can join me for some live Zoom workshops to up your magical skills. Each month I hold a workshop on the first Sunday of the month, and the series is called the First Sunday's Witchcraft Workshops, and it takes place on the first Sunday of every month at 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern. These 2-hour Zoom workshops offer deep knowledge and a chance to develop your magical skills. Plus, you can ask questions and connect with me about some amazing topics. So we have some great ones lined up for this year, and they're all up and available. So you can find them on witchcraftworkshops.com. In May, we'll be doing capnomancy and pyromancy, the secret of candle, smoke, and flame reading. In June, we'll be talking about summer solstice magic, pagan and folk magic traditions around the world. July, we'll be talking about moon magic, working with the moon to transform your magic. And in August, we'll be talking about and learning about mastering the pendulum for divination, spirit contact, and more. Oh, we've got ones about past lives, spiritualism and seances, the witches' ladders, winter solstice magic, all kinds of things. After registering, you'll receive a confirmation email containing information about joining the webinar. So check them out and register by going to witchcraftworkshops.com. Now, the eve of Green Sunday is Saturday, and it's called Kleczania. Kleczania is kneeling, is literally translates to kneeling. But on Kleczania, that is the day that you're going to decorate your house. You decorate the yard, the house, the farm buildings, and you decorate them with the green tree branches or large leaves, which you are often collected in the forest. So on Saturday morning before sunrise, Young women gather fragrant herbs and branches and then take them back. And during the day and in the evening, they decorate their homes with those green branches of maple, linden, and ash trees for protection and decoration. The floor of the house is covered with fragrant herbs, calamus, thyme, tansy, wormwood. So the house smells and is beautiful. And it's also to protect the home from evil spirits. Branches are stuck in the roof of the house, on the gates, near the windows, and also behind the icons in the home. The young women weave wreaths from lilies of the valley, forget-me-nots, thyme, cornflowers, sometimes, unless it's rusalky week, I guess. They can also weave in wormwood, which is to protect against evil spirits. And then they float these wreaths on the water the following day. Now, how fresh your plants are the next day. You're doing all this preparation on Saturday, and how your plants look on Sunday was considered a prediction of whether everyone in the family would live to see the next green Saturday. So you wanted them to be fresh. And after these rituals, they would go to the house and they would sit down to a traditional dinner. And that is the kleczania. There's also kumlinia, and kumlinia was a ceremony for young women it's like a best friend ceremony where you commit to your best friend. So what they would do is they would create a wreath and they would either make it on the birch tree or hang it from a tree. And then they would give each other a kiss through the wreath or exchange gifts. This was so that they could become kumi. So kumi means like a family member who's not a blood relation. Usually kum or kuma means your godmother or godfather, but it also means your best friend, your bosom friend. And so to have this ritual to create your best friend or to seal your friendship, it's kind of like the old ritual of like being a blood brother or blood sister, right? So they might give small gifts through the wreath as well. They might be ribbons or a handkerchief or something like that. And they would celebrate this ritual, and then they would have a meal together. And this was a beautiful little ritual that was done also during this very, very special time. Well, that about does it for this episode of Baba Yaga's Magic. If you would like to get even more info about Slavic magic, then check out the Learn page over at the Parlor of Wonders, where you will find a ton of resources, including workshops, blog articles, past podcast episodes, and the way to join me live over Zoom for the Magic Q&A Tea Party that takes place every Sunday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern. Just go to parlorofwonders.com and click on the Learn tab to see all the goodies there. I want to say thank you to all the Spell Squad members out there who have subscribed to and shared this podcast with your friends. I want to say thank you to the fabulous folks who have left reviews on iTunes and Stitcher. And thank you to Gilles Navarre for production and engineering. And thank you to you for joining me. I'm looking forward to next episode when we'll be learning about Kupala, the midsummer celebration. Until next time, this is Madame Pamita and Baba Yaga saying Za Mahiyu to magic, and may all your stories have the happiest fairy tale endings.